Welcome to PsychWSigmund, the podcast, where we explore the fascinating world of psychology and uncover the secrets of the human mind. I'm your host, Sigmund, and today we're going to dive into a fundamental concept in psychology that reveals how our brains process information in a sequential manner: serial position effect. So, what is serial position effect? Simply put, it's the tendency for people to remember the first and last items in a series or sequence more easily than the items in the middle. This phenomenon has been extensively studied in psychology, and its implications are far-reaching, affecting everything from learning and memory to marketing and mental health. To understand why serial position effect is important, let's take a brief look at its history. The concept emerged in the early 20th century, when psychologists like Hermann Ebbinghaus and Mary Whiton Calkins began studying human memory and learning. They discovered that when people are presented with a list of items, they tend to recall the first item and the last item more accurately than the items in between. But why does this happen? One major psychological theory that explains serial position effect is the idea of working memory. Our brains have limited capacity for holding information in working memory, which is the mental space where we temporarily store and manipulate information. When we're presented with a series of items, our working memory can only hold so much information at a time, making it harder to recall items in the middle of the sequence. Another key theory that contributes to serial position effect is the concept of attention. When we're presented with new information, our brains automatically allocate attention to the most important or salient aspects of that information. In the case of a series or sequence, our brains tend to focus more attention on the beginning and end, which makes those items more memorable. One classic study by Atkinson and Schifrin demonstrated that people tend to recall the first and last items in a list more accurately than the items in the middle, even when the list is presented in a random order. More recent studies have used neuroimaging techniques like fMRI to examine the neural mechanisms underlying serial position effect, finding that areas of the brain involved in attention and working memory are more active when processing the first and last items in a sequence. But what about real-world applications? Understanding serial position effect can have significant implications for fields like education, marketing, and even mental health. For example, teachers can use this concept to structure their lessons more effectively, presenting key information at the beginning and end of a lecture to maximize retention. Marketers can apply serial position effect to advertising, placing their most important messages or calls to action at the start and end of commercials. In therapeutic settings, cognitive behavioral therapists might use serial position effect to help clients reframe negative thought patterns by focusing on the most memorable aspects of a situation, i.e., the first and last items in a series. By acknowledging the limitations of our working memory and using strategies that take advantage of primacy and recency effects, we can become more effective communicators and learners. To illustrate this concept further, consider a case study where a therapist is helping a client overcome a traumatic experience. The therapist might ask the client to recall the first and last moments of the traumatic event, as these are likely to be most vivid in their memory. By reframing these memories and reconsolidating them into long-term storage, the client can begin to process and heal from the trauma more effectively. Another example of serial position effect in action is in the field of education. Imagine you're a student trying to learn a new list of vocabulary words for a test. If you use a technique like spaced repetition, where you review the words at increasingly longer intervals, you can take advantage of the primacy and recency effects to improve your retention of the words. In conclusion, serial position effect is a fundamental concept in psychology that reveals how our brains process information in a sequential manner. By recognizing the power of primacy and recency effects, we can improve our memory, learning, and communication skills. As my colleagues in the field would agree, this concept has far-reaching implications for fields like education, marketing, and even mental health. As we wrap up today's episode, I'd like to leave you with a thought-provoking insight. Our brains are wired to respond to patterns and sequences, but it's up to us to harness this knowledge to become more effective and compassionate individuals. By understanding how our minds work, we can take control of our learning, communication, and decision-making processes, leading to greater success and well-being in all areas of life. That's all for today's Psych with Sigmund. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, may your ego find balance between pleasure and reality.